Hi, welcome to this video. I'm gonna take you on a tour to see my favorite paintings in the Museum of Fine Arts. Like I'm a fancy gallery curator. Let's do this. When it comes to fine art, I'm obsessed with greenery. I want to see all sorts of plants, vegetations, and trees. It's always a little tricky subject, so I love seeing how artists manage to make it work. And of course, I'm always making palettes in the back of my mind. Apparently everybody loves cats, not the most shocking news, I guess. We're about to enter my favorite room ever, where there is not only this huge painting, but also video mapping of some tree shadows and nature ambient sounds. It's the perfect experience, although it's a sinking ship. I guess we're dying in style. I believe most of us enjoy going to museums. We feel inspired in a way, but it's not always that we know what to do with the inspiration. It's not easy channeling all that into work, especially if we have a very different style from the usual realistic pieces. Taking myself as an example, my first idea was to think of my favorite painting from the whole museum and make my own version of it, but I'm kinda in a phase where I love simple illustrations with no complex backgrounds, where I try my best not to overwork it and not to make it realistic at all. This is my favorite painting. It's called The Greenhouse. I thought I could stay on the greenhouse theme and paint happy planters. I'm trying to practice gouache because I've only used it a couple times, so I bought this watercolor pad by Fabriano for that. It's cold pressed and fine grain, which I thought was a nice combination to my taste, but oh boy, little did I know. The paper is super smooth. It feels almost like Bristol paper or vellum, and I do not like it. Neither did my gouache. The paint basically floats on top of the paper. There is no texture at all for the pigment to sink into, which gives this kindergarten look to whatever you do. I almost gave up like 67 times, but I guess it's okay because I still get to practice mixing colors. With watercolors, we're pretty much diluting the washes all the time, making it very transparent. We can do the same thing with gouache, but since it's opaque, dark colors dry lighter and light colors dry darker than what you mix, which is very confusing when you're not used to it. And for that exact reason, I failed miserably to make the pastel greens I wanted for the leaves. I had to add a lot more white, which is why past me bought a bigger tube of white than the others now that I remember. But that's why we practice, to understand things better, huh? Now that I'm watching this after I paint it and already know the results, I can already tell that that's not gonna be pastel and light at all. The magic of practicing. The very first few strokes were kinda okay. I thought the paper was gonna hold up nicely, until I got to fill in the bigger areas. Whew, not pleasant at all. At this point right here, I was like, the colors are not even right. This paper feels weird. It's patchy and looking like acrylic with all this build-up. I have no idea what's going on. And then I started smiling because it's funny. Usually we watch artists doing time lapses and we have no idea of what they're thinking while they're painting. Here you can see how liquid and transparent this green looks, even though it's a very thick and creamy texture in the palette. It was supposed to be quite a heavy layer, but instead, it kept dancing around the surface of the paper as if it had a lot of water. Here's where studying comes in handy. Every pigment has its own properties, so how the chemicals react with the binders and with water can be very particular. And of course, different brands mix things differently. There's also the quality you choose. Student grade paints are gonna have more fillers than artist grade paints. That's why experimentation is so important. It's only by working and seeing the effects of each combination that we're able to understand it and get less frustrated. It's not always about buying this or that specifically, it's more about really knowing the paints you have and the best way to use them. In fact, if we keep buying different colors from different grades and brands, it could become very confusing for the amount of new attributes to get a hold of. But of course, that's not easy to do, because as artists, we're very curious to try new supplies all the time, especially if it's affordable and cute. So the minimum we can do is always practice, like a broken record. Up until this point, I had never worked much with greens, so I thought this problem could either be my mixes or the new paper. I could have swatched all these mixes on a good 100% cotton watercolor paper, but that would be too easy, huh? I like the mystery. Nah, I'm just too lazy. But I have to say that after applying this pink vermilion, I felt 100% comfortable with blaming the paper, because it's a mix I'm pretty used to and had never had any problem with. And definitely not this kind of problem. It was basically impossible to get an even wash. And now starts the tricky part with working traditionally. I want to add some dimension, but I don't want to go too deep with shadows and highlights, so I kinda go on this loop of trying and erasing things. I'll leave you to watch me add some details, textures, and pops of color. And here's what I ended up with. I had planned to do some more smaller sketches on the rest of the page, but I kinda still wanted to see those planters with the pastel look. So Photoshop, here we go. I pretty much always start sketching on Photoshop because it's very practical to move things around, scale, erase perfectly, and all the good stuff. Then I'll either trace it to watercolor paper with a light table or print directly to it. I also pre-select some colors and make a simple palette so I know exactly what I'm going for. It's kinda easy to lose yourself with so many possibilities, so giving it some limitations always help me. I use textured brushes from Kyle T. Webster. He used to sell packs, but now some of them already come with Photoshop, which is pretty handy. I'm using brushes from the dry media in his Gouache pack. Sometimes it's such a relief to go back to Photoshop and have any color that you want. Also the possibility of changing it anytime. But it also comes with some bad habits. I constantly have to remember to zoom out and see the bigger picture, a problem we don't really have when working traditionally. And here is a good example. I painted the value of those texture scratches too close to the value of the leaves, so when I zoom out, I can barely see it. I only noticed it once I was done, and when I came back and tried to change it, I had painted the scratches on the same layer I painted the leaves. Classic digital problem. Speaking about pros and cons, at least I'm sure to never break the tip of the pencil, right? Here you can see some blobs of colors. I always do some color tests before I do the real thing. Now a little bit of shading just to separate the leaves from one another. Painting on Photoshop makes me so happy because there's so much room for experimenting. I tried at least 5 different ways of shading this one and ended up perfectly deleting all of them, which is practically impossible with paint. It always encourages me to keep trying different ways of creating textures. And here's the final result. I really hope you enjoyed this chatty format, and I hope the happy planters made you happy. Yeah, that was not creative at all. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!